How do you figure out what your own main problem in chess is without a coach? Yeah, good question. So the classic way of going over your games and trying to find your weaknesses, guys, is as follows. And you can do this without a coach, but your conclusions, right, might not be as accurate as someone who's like stronger than you and can kind of see with like a more of like a bird's eye view. But anyway, here's the process, guys. First, you play some games, right? 9 games in a tournament, or let's say you play 30 games or 60 games, whatever. You play some games. Then you go through the games one by one and you try to find your mistakes. How you find these mistakes is obviously the difficult part, right? It's really good to analyze with a friend or the higher rated player, right? Or the coach. Here we're assuming without a coach. You can analyze with an engine as long as you try to understand what the engine is telling you and why the engine suggestions are actually better than the moves you played. Was there like a tactic that you missed that you can kind of figure out using the engine? Was your move weak because all of a sudden you created some weakness that your opponent can now attack multiple times? One way or another, you have to try to find your mistakes in the game. And if it feels overwhelming, I would say just try to find 2 or 3 moments to learn from. You don't have to analyze like the whole game. You don't have to look at like every single question mark if there's like, 20 of them, right? If that feels very overwhelming, just find 3 moments that you feel like you can learn from. And then analyze those moments and classify the mistake. Was it a calculation mistake, right? Which is very typical. If it was, like, did you miss like a 1-move tactic, like your piece is just hanging? Or did you miss some like tricky 3-move combination that maybe you could have seen if you focused on it, right? So you have to differentiate between stuff. Did you miss like a really simple tactic for the opponent? Like that's a different thing than missing a simple win that you had, right? So you try to characterize the mistakes as specifically as you can without being like, insane about it. You can also make positional mistakes. Again, you made a weakness and then your position was just very weak and you didn't know how to defend it after that. You didn't activate your king in the endgame. That's a very typical mistake. You played too many moves with one piece, right? You didn't develop. You grabbed material. You're being too greedy. You didn't grab material when you should have. Like your opponent hung a pawn and you were scared and you didn't want to take it. That's a very typical mistake that people make. And then afterwards you analyze the engine's like, yeah, you could have taken the pawn and it was +2 and you're totally winning. And okay, you try to kind of learn from that. So you classify the mistakes you make. And then once you've gone through your list of 10 games, 20 games, 30 games, you have like 30, 40, 50, 60 mistakes to look at, right? And you kind of start seeing a pattern. You don't even have to do it for like 30 games, right? 4 or 5 games, you'll start to see some patterns, right? Making lots of mistakes in calculation. Lots of mistakes where you're not developing your pieces or what have you. Basically, you look for patterns. And this is what a coach does. Like, this is what I do. Someone sends me their username, I go through their games, and I just see like, okay, I see like 4 games here where like they did an automatic recapture where instead they had like a winning in-between move, right? So I'm like, yeah, you got to solve some puzzles with some Zwischenstück themes, It's like, honestly, not that hard, right? But you got to do the work. Of course, you got to go through the games and analyze them and then classify the mistakes and then try to work on the areas that you think you need the most work on, right? So maybe you're throwing away all your games in the end game, right? Lots of players like definitely mess up in the end game over and over again. So that's a sign you got to work on your end games. And basically, yeah, once you kind of see a pattern, you start to notice like you're doing certain things over and over again. That's kind of the first step in correcting a lot of these problems.